The notice that stayed up. In Carsley, a village notice board may look harmless until one asks who decides what the village is allowed to see. Hello, and welcome to Cotswold Cozy Mysteries. I'm Clara Whitfield. Carsley had survived arguments about hedges, church flowers, parking, dogs, and the proper price of homemade marmalade. Now it faced something apparently more civilized. A single official village notice board. One board. One tidy system, and unfortunately one person deciding what deserved to appear upon it. Agatha Raisin might have approved of the idea had her own announcement not become its first public joke. So before we begin, would you trust the person who keeps everything tidy? Chapter 1. Miscellaneous Hobbies. Agatha Raisin had spent £47 on 200 notices, advertising a service nobody had yet asked her to provide. She considered this enterprise. The cards were ivory, thick, and professionally printed. Private enquiries undecession. Experience, risorsa. Raisin. Agatha entered Nancy Pargeter's village shop, carrying a small stack of them, and found Nancy tearing notices from the front window. Eggs for sale vanished first. Then choir rehearsal. Then a missing ginger cat. "What are you doing?" demanded Agatha. "Improving Carsley," said Nancy bitterly. She pointed towards a neat blonde woman sorting notices beside the biscuit shelves. "This is Verena Quill. Parish Council hired her." Verena smiled. "Community Communications Advisor. Notice board woman, Sensi." Carsley's notices, Verena explained, would no longer clutter the shop, Red Lion, church porch, and parish hall. Everything would now appear on one central board beside the old bus shelter. Clearer, fairer, and more inclusive. Nancy folded her arms. My window was perfectly inclusive. Agatha barely listened. She had spotted the temporary board. It contained tidy categories. Communities. Scraces. Local support. Lost? At last, an audience worthy of her new announcement. Agatha handed Verena a card. "I'd like this displayed prominently." Verena read it. Private inquiries. How interesting. Agatha immediately disliked the way she said interesting. "I have considerable experience." "I'm sure. I've solved murders." Someone near the bread shelf coughed. Verena selected a blue glass-headed drawing pin from a tin. The brass shank was slightly bent. She pinned Agatha's notice beneath a final heading. "Mrs. Lanius' Hobbies." Agatha stared. "What is that?" "Your notice." "I can see that." She pointed upward. "That." Verena smiled patiently. "We weren't certain where private inquiry work fitted. It fits under professional services. I understood it was more of a personal activity. Detecting murder is not crochet." Nancy suddenly became fascinated by the till. A man holding a loaf turned away to hide a smile. Mrs. Bloxby entered at precisely the wrong moment. "My dear," she said, noticing the card. "What an elegant notice." "Thank you." Her eyes rose to the heading. "Oh, it is in the wrong section," said Agatha. "So I gathered." Verena began explaining the new system. Notices considered unsuitable would be removed. Some were already being kept in a folder as examples of Carsley's old, untidy method. Mrs. Bloxby glanced at the leather folder beneath Verena's arm. "Who decides what is unsuitable?" "For now, I do." A young woman entered with a school-aged boy. Agatha recognized Tamsin Rowe. Tamsin looked at the stripped window. "Where's the notice asking for second-hand school shoes?" Verena turned. "That was yours?" Tamsin stiffened. "I didn't say it was. I merely assumed. There are better ways to ask for assistance." "I wasn't asking for assistance." The boy tugged at her coat. Tamsin flushed. "We're leaving." She hurried out. Mrs. Bloxby watched her go. People sometimes ask anonymously, because that is the only way they can bear to ask. Verena sighed. "We can't organize a community around embarrassment." Agatha looked at her more closely. That sentence irritated her almost as much as miscellaneous hobbies. Perhaps because embarrassment was something Agatha understood extremely well. Verena returned to sorting notices. Agatha straightened her card. It immediately sagged sideways. "That pin is bent." Verena pushed the blue glass head harder. "So it is." The notice became even more crooked. By lunchtime, several villagers had visited Nancy's shop specifically to inspect Agatha Raisin's new hobby. By mid-afternoon somebody had written beneath it in pencil, "Does she find lost Ferris?" Agatha tore the edition off. Unfortunately, by then everyone in Carsley had seen it. Chapter 2. The things taken down. The parish hall smelled of floor polish, instant coffee, and the faint dampness that afflicted old buildings, no matter how often committees discussed ventilation. Verena Quill stood beside an easel, displaying a drawing of Carsley's proposed notice-board. It was tasteful. Agatha distrusted it at once. Patrick Bell, chairman of the parish council, tapped a spoon against a mug. "We are here," he announced, "to embrace clarity." Nancy Pargeter muttered, "I preferred clutter." Verena smiled as though she had not heard. The purpose of the One Village notice board is simple. Everyone should have equal access to information. Alan Mudge, retired printer, lifted a hand. "Then why is everything printed in that dreadful typeface?" A few people turned. Alan pointed accusingly at the display. "It has no character. It's designed for readability," said Verena. "So are road signs." Agatha almost liked him. Verena continued. Notices would be limited by size. Commercial advertising required approval. Anonymous complaints would not be accepted. Personal requests would be directed towards appropriate support channels. At this, Tamsin Rowe lowered her eyes. Agatha noticed. So did Mrs. Bloxby. June Tibbet sat near the tea-urn, arranging parish hall booking slips into a neat stack. June was a pale, mild woman with soft grey hair and an expression of permanent apology. "I may have misunderstood," she said. "But will the parish hall board disappear entirely?" "Yes," said Verena. "Oh, of course, how sensible." June smiled. Her fingers stopped moving. Nancy raised her hand without waiting to be called. "My shop notices bring people into my shop. The new board is less than 2 minutes away." 2 minutes away from my till. That shouldn't affect genuine trade. Nancy became very brisk. "I never said I was worried." Agatha knew that tone. Nancy was extremely worried. Roland Peake, the local estate agent, leaned back in his chair. "The important thing is preserving village appeal." He had complimented the parish hall curtains when he arrived, which meant, in Agatha's experience, that he was about to say something dishonest. "A clean central information point looks much better to visitors." "Visitors don't buy my potatoes," said Nancy. "They buy houses. That explains your interest." Patrick Bell intervened. "For transparency, perhaps we should avoid commercial disagreements." Agatha caught Mrs. Bloxby's eye. For transparency was apparently Patrick's preferred method of hiding discomfort. Verena opened her leather folder. Inside were dozens of removed notices. Handwritten cards, flyers, requests. Complaints, advertisements. Agatha glimpsed one about second-hand school shoes. Tamsin saw it too. Her face tightened. "Why are you keeping those?" Verena looked at her. Historical comparison. "They were taken down." "Yes." "So they're finished?" "Not necessarily." The room quietened. Verena appeared almost pleased by the attention. "I think it's useful to understand what people chose to communicate before the new system." Alan frowned. "You mean you're keeping copies of private notices? They were public. Doesn't mean they were meant to last forever," said Mrs. Bloxby. Verena shut the folder. "Nothing displayed publicly is truly private." It was the sort of sentence that sounded clever until one imagined it being applied to oneself. Agatha thought of her own notice. Then she thought of the ferret remark. Her irritation sharpened. Alan leaned forward. "You've removed notices that have been part of village life for years. Some of them were anonymous complaints. That doesn't make them worthless." "No," said Verena pleasantly, "only cowardly." Alan flushed. That was interesting. Across the room June dropped a booking slip. She bent to retrieve it before anyone else could. The meeting continued through arguments about maximum paper size, church events, garage sales, piano lessons, and whether a missing cat should remain displayed after 6 weeks. Eileen Voss objected strongly to any time limit on lost-and-found notices. "Things return when they're ready," she said. Verena looked puzzled. "Things?" Cat's gloves. People. Nobody quite knew what to say to that. By the end, Verena had achieved something rare in Carsley. She had united almost everyone against her while persuading Patrick Bell. that the meeting had been a success. As chairs scraped back, Agatha saw Verena slide the folder into her bag. "Keeping all that seems excessive," Agatha said. Verena glanced at her. "You'd be surprised what people reveal when they think a piece of paper will disappear. And what do you intend to do with it?" "Nothing improper." Agatha disliked that answer even more than she would have disliked a lie. Outside evening light lay softly across the honey-coloured cottages. Mrs. Blocksby joined Agatha on the path. "She is efficient," Mrs. Blocksby said. "That's one word for her. I wonder whether she understands that removing a notice can be as unkind-handed as putting one up." Agatha looked back through the parish hall window. Verena was speaking quietly to June. June nodded, smiled, and gathered the abandoned booking slips into her arms. For a woman who seemed happy to surrender responsibility, June held them rather tightly. Chapter 3. A notice for the wrong eyes. The Red Lion had never required an official communications policy. Information entered through the front door, bought a drink, and spread naturally. By 7:30, most of Carsley had formed an opinion about the new notice board, and none of those opinions required further evidence. Agatha sat near the fireplace, with Mrs. Blocksby and Sir Charles Frayth, who had arrived in a jacket that looked casual, only because it had cost enough not to appear new. Charles took a sip of whisky. "So, Agatha, how is the detective business?" "Perfectly well. I hear you've diversified." She narrowed her eyes. "Into what?" "Ferrets." Mrs. Blocksby had a smile behind her wine-glass. "I hope," said Agatha, "you're enjoying yourself." "Immensely." Across the pub, Verena Quill stood beside Patrick Bell, discussing the official unveiling scheduled for the following evening. Nancy Pargeter was telling anyone who listened that moving notices away from her shop had already cost her 3 customers, though how she had counted them remained unclear. Alan Mudge sat at the bar correcting a handwritten sign advertising steak pie. "There should be a hyphen," he told the barman. "There shouldn't," said the barman. "There absolutely should." Roland Peake entered, praised the pub's wonderfully authentic atmosphere, and immediately began talking about property values. Agatha watched him. Nobody complimented a room that much unless they wanted something from it. Verena crossed towards him. "Roland, I found another planning notice missing this afternoon." Roland's smile held. "Did you?" "Yes." "How mysterious." "Not especially." His smile weakened. At a nearby table, June Tibbet arranged beer mats into a neat pile, although nobody had asked her to. Patrick Bell joined them. "For transparency," he said, "I think we should avoid discussing individual notices before the launch." "Excellent idea," said Charles. "Particularly if they're embarrassing." Agatha kicked his ankle under the table. He looked delighted. Verena glanced towards Alan. "And I've discovered several anonymous complaint notices were professionally printed." Alan's hand stopped halfway to his glass. "You seem to discover a great deal." "I'm paid to notice patterns." "So are detectives," said Agatha. Verena smiled at her. "Yes, I suppose they are." The smile was mild. That made it worse. Eileen Voss arrived, carrying a small stack of lost property cards. "Can these go on tomorrow?" Verena examined them. One concerned a child's red mitten. Another advertised a missing bicycle. A third simply read, "Silver locket. Sentimental value, Ascot shop." "These are legitimate," Verena said. Eileen looked relieved. "And the others?" "The repeated ones won't be displayed." "They're not repeated." "Different objects, same contact number, same handwriting." Eileen's face changed. Agatha noticed. Verena lowered her voice. "We can discuss it privately." "I'd rather not." Eileen gathered the cards and moved away. Charles leaned closer to Agatha. "Your notice board woman is collecting enemies efficiently. She calls it inclusion. Very modern." Mrs. Blocksby gave him a look. "Cruelty isn't modern, Charles. Only the vocabulary changes." For once he had no quick reply. Later, Agatha went towards the back passage in search of the ladies' room, and heard Verena speaking just beyond the kitchen door. Another person stood with her, hidden from Agatha's view. "You shouldn't have removed it," Verena said. A low reply followed, too soft to identify. Verena continued. "Taking a notice down is sometimes the only way to see who panics." Agatha stopped. The unseen person said something sharp. Then footsteps approached. Agatha moved quickly into the corridor and pretended to study a framed photograph of the village cricket team. Eileen emerged. She saw Agatha and looked startled. "Oh, hello." Eileen clutched her handbag. "Were you waiting?" "For the lavatory." "Of course." She hurried away. Agatha watched her go. When she returned to the bar, Verena was closing her leather folder. For an instant Agatha saw several old notices inside. A planning objection, a handwritten complaint about barking dogs, the school shoes request. Then the folder snapped shut. "You really are keeping everything," Agatha said. "Only what matters. And who decides that?" Verena slipped the folder beneath her arm. "At present." Her pleasant expression returned. "I do." She walked away. Charles raised his eyebrows. Still worried about being classified as a hobby, Agatha looked across the pub at Verena, then at Alan, Roland, Eileen and June. Not quite. Outside, rain had begun tapping against the windows. For the first time, the new notice board seemed less like an irritation. It looked like a place where far too many people had something they wanted removed. Chapter 4. Rain at the bus shelter. By 6 the next evening, Carsley had acquired weather suitable for an unveiling. Rain swept along the lane in slanting silver lines. The church tower had disappeared into mist, and the new notice board gleamed beneath the shelter roof like something too expensive to be left outdoors. Patrick Bell stood beneath an umbrella beside a folding table, carrying warm white wine and damp cheese straws. "For transparency," he said, "we may have to postpone." Nancy Pargeter looked at the sky. "For common sense, we should have postponed an hour ago." Agatha had come partly because she wanted to see whether Verena had finally moved her announcement out of miscellaneous hobbies, and partly because refusing to attend would suggest she cared. Charles had sent a message, claiming the rain would damage his shoes. Agatha considered this cowardice disguised as aristocracy. Mrs. Blocksby arrived with Reverend Blocksby beneath one umbrella. Alan Mudge stood inside the shelter glaring at the lettering on the new board. "They've centred that heading badly." "Alan," said Nancy, "nobody can see it through the rain." "I can." June Tibbet appeared carrying a biscuit tin filled with spare pins, tape and string. "I thought someone might need these." "Always prepared," said Patrick approvingly. June gave her apologetic smile. "I only try to be useful." Agatha glanced at the tin. Several blue glass-headed drawing pins lay among the ordinary brass ones. Then Patrick checked his watch. "Where is Verena?" The unveiling had been scheduled for 6:15. By 6:30 Verena had not appeared. Roland Peake came hurrying from the direction of the lane, his coat collar raised. "I saw her car near the parish hall earlier." "You spoke to her?" Agatha asked. "Briefly." "About what?" Roland smiled. "Village matters." Which, from Roland, could mean anything from parking to fraud. Patrick tried Verena's telephone. No answer. The little group gradually lost its enthusiasm for standing in the rain. Reverend Blocksby suggested everyone return to the parish hall. June began collecting the untouched glasses. "I expect she's been delayed." Then Agatha noticed something on the board. One rectangular patch of cork was bare. Around it were notices for choir practice, firewood, a missing terrier, and Nancy's weekly vegetable offer. But the empty space looked deliberate. Was something there? June followed her gaze. "I may have misunderstood, but I thought there was a planning notice." Roland turned sharply. "What planning notice?" Nancy looked at him. "Interesting question." It was only a question. Agatha stepped closer. A torn strip of white paper clung to the lower edge of the board. It fluttered in the damp breeze. Someone had removed a notice in a hurry. "Don't touch it," said a voice behind her. Bill Wong came along the lane beneath a dark waterproof coat, accompanied by another officer. Agatha frowned. "What are you doing here?" Bill's expression told her before he answered. "Agatha, move away from the board." The humour drained from the little gathering. "What happened?" Mrs. Blocksby asked. Bill looked towards the far side of the shelter, where the lane dipped towards a low stone wall. "Verena Quill has been found nearby." Nobody spoke. Patrick's umbrella tilted. "Found? There appears to have been an accident." Bill's tone remained calm, but Agatha knew him well enough to hear the caution underneath. "Is she?" "Yes." The rain suddenly seemed louder. Bill asked everyone to remain where they were until names and timings had been taken. Verena, it appeared, had been discovered by a passing motorist near the side of the lane. The initial impression was that she had slipped or stumbled in the wet, but Bill was not treating anything as settled. Agatha looked again at the notice board. Bill: "No, I haven't said anything yet. You were going to. There's a torn notice. I can see it, and something has been removed. I can see that, too." He crouched near the shelter wall. A scrap of paper had blown into a patch of wet grass. An officer lifted it carefully. Still attached to one corner was a drawing pin, blue glass head. Agatha stared. The brass shank was bent, not dramatically, just enough to sit at a slight angle, the same small defect that had made her own notice hang crooked in Nancy's shop. Bill noticed her expression. "What? I've seen that sort before. Blue drawing pins are not exactly rare. This one's bent." "So?" Agatha looked towards June's biscuit tin. June was holding it tightly against her coat. "I don't know yet." Bill straightened. "Then for once wait until you do." Patrick began explaining that the entire project had been intended to strengthen community cohesion. Nancy told him to stop talking. Alan stood pale and silent. Roland stared at the empty rectangle on the board, and June quietly placed the lid back on her tin of pins. Agatha watched each of them. The rain had washed chalk from the pavement and ink from the edges of several notices, but one thing remained perfectly visible: the empty space where somebody had wanted a piece of Carsley to disappear. Chapter 5. The printer everyone suspects. By 9 the next morning, Carsley had decided Verena Quill had been murdered. By 10 it had decided who had done it. Nancy Pargeter's shop was full of people buying things they did not need in order to discuss Alan Mudge. "He threatened her," said one woman, selecting a packet of biscuits. "He corrected her grammar," said another. "In Carsley, that's practically a threat." Nancy slammed a loaf onto the counter. "He disliked her. That isn't evidence." "No," said Agatha. But the anonymous notices might be. She had been awake since 6, replaying the rain, the empty space on the board, and the bent blue pin. Bill had said very little when she telephoned him that morning. The police were no longer assuming a simple accident, but he would not say why. This lack of information irritated Agatha almost as much as being told not to interfere. Alan entered the shop. Conversation stopped with insulting speed. He looked around. "Please don't let me interrupt." Nobody answered. Alan picked up a newspaper. Agatha watched him. His cuffs carried faint black ink stains. "Been printing this morning?" she asked. Alan folded the paper carefully. "I have been a printer for 40 years. Ink does occasionally become involved. You printed those anonymous complaint notices." Nancy looked sharply at Agatha. Alan's face hardened. "That is none of your business." "So you did." "I didn't say that. You didn't need to." Someone near the milk refrigerator whispered. "I knew it." Alan turned. "You knew nothing." Agatha stepped closer. "Verena knew, though, didn't she?" His jaw tightened. "She had suspicions, and planned to expose you. She enjoyed exposing people." There was bitterness in his voice, but also something else. Fear. Agatha felt the little internal click she had learned to trust too often and distrust not often enough. "What happened at the board last night?" "I wasn't there when she died." "Were you there earlier?" Alan hesitated. That was enough for half the shop. Nancy swore softly. Alan looked at Agatha with dislike. "I went to see the lettering." "The lettering?" "It was poorly spaced." Someone laughed. Alan flushed. "I also wanted to ask Verena for my original cards back. The anonymous complaints." "My work?" "You mean the complaints about dogs, bins, parking, and somebody's noisy boiler?" "They were commissioned." "By whom?" "That is confidential." Agatha folded her arms. "How noble." Alan's expression changed. "You think I killed her?" "I think you had reason to be angry. So did half this village." "Yes, but half the village wasn't secretly printing poison pen notices." The words travelled through the shop like smoke. Alan went very still. They were not poison pen notices. They were anonymous. Because people are cowards. That includes the people who pay you to complain for them. Alan pushed the newspaper back onto the rack. You've already decided. Agatha heard the accusation, and because it was true, disliked him more for making it. When did you last see Verena? Yesterday afternoon. Where? Parish Hall. That's not much of an alibi. I wasn't offering one. He walked out. The door shut. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Mrs. Derry from Church Lane said, well, that single word contained conviction, pity, and considerable enjoyment. Nancy glared at Agatha. You shouldn't have done that in here. Why not? Because by lunchtime everyone will say he confessed. He practically did. No, he admitted printing notices. Agatha reached for cigarettes, remembered where she was, and shoved them back into her handbag. A man near the vegetable display cleared his throat. I saw June Tibbet yesterday. Agatha turned. Where? Parish Hall, before the unveiling. What was she doing? Taking pins from the kitchen cupboard. Blue ones. A handful. The shop became interested again. Nancy shrugged. June organizes the hall. She said she was helping with the board, the man added. That sounds like June, said Mrs. Derry. Helpful, reliable, forgettable. The detail died almost immediately beneath renewed discussion of Alan. By midday, someone claimed Alan had threatened Verena with a paper knife. By 1, the paper knife had become a printing blade. By 2, Alan had supposedly been seen running through the rain. None of it was true. Agatha discovered this when Bill arrived at her cottage later that afternoon. You've been busy, he said. She bristled. I asked questions. You publicly accused Alan Mudge of murder. I did not use the word murder. You didn't need to. Agatha disliked hearing her own argument returned to her. Bill sat opposite her. Alan printed the anonymous complaints. We know that. So that explains embarrassment. It does not explain Verena's missing folder. Agatha frowned. What missing folder? The leather one she carried everywhere. Agatha thought of Tamsin's school shoes notice, Roland's planning objection, the old complaint cards. It wasn't with her. No. Bill leaned forward. Whoever killed Verena may have wanted something she had collected, not something she had posted. That unsettled Agatha. Alan had seemed such a satisfying answer because Carsley already wanted him to be guilty. Old-fashioned, secretive, petty, easy. Bill stood. And Agatha? What? Leave him alone. After he had gone, she looked through the window towards the village. Across Carsley, Alan Mudge's reputation was already being dismantled one conversation at a time. And Agatha knew, with increasing discomfort, that she had supplied the first pin. Chapter 6. Hodge, Boswell, and the bent pin. Rain returned that evening, tapping steadily against Agatha's kitchen windows. She sat at the table with a cigarette, a mug of coffee, and the remains of her dignity. Alan Mudge had not been seen in the village since lunchtime. Nancy had telephoned to say 2 people had cancelled printing jobs with him. Mrs. Bloxby had telephoned to say nothing directly critical, which was worse. You were rather quick, she had said. Agatha had replied that speed was sometimes essential in detection. Mrs. Bloxby had paused. Yes, and sometimes in falling downstairs. Now Agatha glared at the notice she had brought home from Nancy's shop. Private inquiries undertaken. Below it, in faint pencil, someone had drawn a ferret. She crushed the paper. Hodge immediately leapt onto the table. Don't! Hodge ignored her. Boswell arrived moments later, because cats considered any prohibition an invitation requiring witnesses. Agatha pushed a heap of papers aside. Among them were notes she had made about Verena's last day. Alan at the parish hall, Roland near the board, Eileen leaving the Red Lion passage, June carrying supplies, Patrick lying about his conversation with Reverend Bloxby. Too many people had secrets. That did not make them murderers. She was beginning to understand this rather later than she would have preferred. Hodge hooked a paw beneath the crumpled announcement. Leave it. The paper slid across the table. A drawing pin dropped from its fold and struck the floor. Blue glass. Agatha stared. She had pulled the pin from the temporary board when she removed her notice. Boswell pounced. No, The cat trapped it beneath one paw. Agatha snatched him away. The pin rolled against the skirting board. When she retrieved it, its brass shank had bent a little farther sideways. Agatha held it between finger and thumb. Bent, not broken. Pressed sideways. She straightened it, then tried pushing it into the cork board beside her telephone with her thumb. It went in almost straight. She pulled it out and pushed again at an angle. The shank curved. Agatha frowned. She remembered Verena pressing the same pin harder when the notice sagged. Then another memory surfaced. The parish hall. June Tibbet beside the tea-urn. Old booking slips. A teaspoon. Agatha had seen June use one dozens of times, though she had never considered it important. June disliked pressing drawing pins with her fingertips because her joints hurt. Instead, she laid the bowl of a teaspoon against the pinhead and pushed sideways. Useful. Harmless. Forgettable. Agatha stood so quickly that Hodge fled. She found her coat. Then stopped. "Don't be an idiot." The cat stared at her. It was a humiliating thing to have to tell oneself aloud. June had used blue pins. So had Verena. The pin at the scene might have come from the parish hall supply. That proved very little. Agatha sat down again. This time she forced herself to think. The police already had the blue pin found with the torn notice. Yet she had seen another bent blue pin recently. Where? She closed her eyes. Parish hall. Not the unveiling. Later. A notice beside the kitchen door announcing revised room booking times. Blue glass pin. Bent sideways. She had noticed it because the paper leaned drunkenly, despite June's otherwise perfect filing. Agatha opened her eyes. If the pin from the scene was already in police evidence, then the bent pins were not unique. But perhaps the bending was. Not one damaged pin. A habit. She telephoned Mrs. Bloxby. "Do you remember June using teaspoons to push drawing pins?" Mrs. Bloxby did not answer immediately. "Yes. Why?" "Her fingers trouble her sometimes." "And does she always do it?" "Often." Agatha looked at the pin. "Does it bend them?" Another pause. "I suppose it might. Thank you." "Agatha." "Yes. Please don't accuse June of murder tomorrow morning." Agatha stiffened. "I wasn't planning to. I'm glad. I can learn from mistakes." Mrs. Bloxby's silence was tactful. Agatha ended the call. She made fresh coffee and returned to her notes. June had access to the parish hall pins. June controlled bookings. June had been near the board, but so had half Carsley. And Verena's missing folder remained more important. Agatha wrote one sentence across the top of a clean sheet. Who made the father to disappear? Then beneath it. And who wanted the board to tell the wrong story? Hodge jumped back onto the table and sat directly on Alan Mudge's name. Agatha scratched behind his ears. "Yes," she said, "I know, I got that one wrong." For once the admission did not feel like defeat. It felt like somewhere better to begin. Chapter 7. Agatha pins the wrong man. The Red Lion snug was too small for a village meeting, and therefore ideal for one. Patrick Bell had called everyone together to decide whether the notice board should remain open, while the police investigated Verena Quill's death. This produced 30 people, 4 opinions, and enough indignation to heat the room without the fire. Agatha arrived determined to behave sensibly. Within 20 minutes she had failed. Alan Mudge sat alone near the window. Conversation avoided him in the exaggerated manner of people wishing him to notice that they were avoiding him. Agatha felt guilty. Unfortunately, guilt made her defensive. Patrick cleared his throat. For transparency, no decision has yet been made about the board. Nancy Parter folded her arms. Then why are we here? To discuss whether a decision should be made. Splendid. Sir Charles beside Agatha whispered, "Democracy is exhausting." She ignored him. Roland Peake wanted the board reopened immediately. A blank notice board gives a very unfortunate impression. "Of what?" asked Nancy. "Instability. You sell cottages, Roland, not governments." Eileen Voss wanted the lost property notices restored. Tamsin Rowe said nothing at all. June Tibbet moved quietly among the tables with a tray of cups. "I may have misunderstood," she said, "but perhaps we ought not speculate about poor Verena." Agatha watched her. June sounded reasonable. June always sounded reasonable. Then Alan spoke. The whole system was rotten from the start. Several heads turned. Patrick stiffened. You objected to the design. I objected to one person deciding what Carsley was permitted to say. Agatha thought of the anonymous complaints, and yet you were perfectly happy, deciding what Carsley should complain about. Alan glared at her. We've already had this conversation. Charles murmured, "Danger, Agatha." She heard him and continued anyway. You printed anonymous notices. Verena discovered it. You went to the parish hall to confront her. I went to collect my work. And then I went home. Did anyone see you? No. The room shifted. Agatha felt it. So did Alan. She stood. You hated what she was doing. She could expose you as the man behind half the anonymous grievances in Carsley. You knew she would be at the board that evening. Mrs. Bloxby said quietly, "Agatha," but Agatha was already committed. You could have arranged a notice to draw her there, then torn it down afterwards to make the scene look like something else. Alan stared at her. That is your evidence? The anonymous printing, your argument with her, your lack of an alibi, and a drawing pin. Agatha hesitated. That hesitation damaged her more than silence would have. Alan gave a short, bitter laugh. You don't have evidence. You have embarrassment. What? She made you ridiculous. So now everyone who disliked her looks like a murderer to you. The room became painfully still. Agatha flushed. Alan stood. You accused me in Nancy's shop. Now people won't bring me work. Mrs. Hewitt cancelled her anniversary invitations this morning. I didn't tell her to. No, you only gave everyone permission. That landed. Even Charles stopped smiling. Alan put on his coat. I printed stupid complaints for people too cowardly to sign their names. I regret it. But I did not kill Verena Quill. He left. Nobody immediately resumed speaking. Then Bill Wong appeared in the doorway. His expression suggested he had heard enough. Agatha outside. She followed him into the corridor. You accused Alan again. I was testing a theory. In front of half Carsley. It fit. Part of it fit. Bill lowered his. We confirmed Alan was printing the anonymous notices. Fresh ink found near the parish hall came from raffle tickets he delivered that afternoon. Agatha's stomach sank. And the murder? No evidence connecting him to it. But Verena threatened to expose him. Yes, that's motive. So is money, shame, jealousy, fear. Half your suspect list has one. Agatha hated when Bill became reasonable. What about the torn notice? We're still working on it. And the missing folder, that matters more. Bill glanced towards the snug. Verena wasn't just keeping complaints. She had notices people believed were gone. Agatha remembered Tamsin's face when the school shoes card appeared in Verena's folder. Bill continued. Somebody took that folder after she died, so whoever killed her wanted what she had collected. Possibly. Roland. Why Roland? The planning objection. Bill sighed. Because estate agents are unpleasant. Because he removed notices that could damage a sale. That is at least a theory. It was not praise, but Agatha accepted it. Back inside, Roland had begun telling Patrick that the village needed to move forward. Agatha watched him. Smooth, nervous, financially interested. Far more promising than Alan. Mrs. Bloxby came to stand beside her. You will apologize to Mr. Mudge. Agatha bristled automatically. I haven't finished investigating. That wasn't what I said. Agatha looked away. June was collecting cups. Near her hand lay a notice announcing parish hall booking changes. It was held in place by a blue glass-headed pin. The shank bent slightly to one side. Agatha stared at it, then at June. June smiled. More tea? No, thank you. For once, Agatha kept the thought to herself. Chapter 8. The estate agent's empty space. Roland Peake's office in Mercester looked as though nobody had ever been allowed to sit down untidily. The cushions matched the curtains. The brochures stood in perfect rows. A bowl of artificial lemons occupied the centre of the reception table with the confidence of something that had never been eaten. Sir Charles examined them. Ghastly. Roland emerged from his office. "Agatha, what a pleasant surprise." "You're lying already," said Agatha. Roland smiled. "Coffee?" "No." "Tea?" "No." "Then do sit down." Agatha remained standing. "We know you removed planning notices from the Carsley board." Roland's smile thinned. "I don't know what you mean." Charles picked up one of the lemons. Remarkably light. Roland snatched it from him. Agatha opened her handbag and produced a photograph she had taken that morning of the empty rectangle on the notice board. Someone objected to the conversion of Rosebank Cottage. "Perfectly normal. And you're selling Rosebank Cottage. Also perfectly normal." The objection notice disappeared. Roland sighed. "Agatha, planning objections are lodged officially. Removing a village notice does not alter the planning process. No. But it may stop a nervous buyer hearing about it before signing something." That silenced him. Charles sat down. "Do tell us when we reach the unpleasant part." Roland walked to the window. "I removed 2 notices." Agatha felt a surge of satisfaction. "When?" "One last week. One on the afternoon Verena died." "And Verena caught you." "Yes." "What happened?" "She threatened to report me to Patrick Bell." Charles laughed. Roland glared at him. "I am trying to run a business. By hiding objections. By preventing hysteria. Half the village signs petitions because somebody once parked badly near the church." Agatha moved closer. "You saw Verena that evening?" "At the board." "In the rain?" "Yes." "What time?" "Just after 6. "And she was alive when you left?" Roland's face hardened. "Of course she was. You had no appointment in Evesham." He looked at her sharply. Agatha smiled. The buyer who was supposedly viewing a cottage had cancelled before 5. Charles had discovered that through the buyer's aunt, who happened to know someone at his club, village investigations were rarely elegant. But they were efficient. Roland rubbed his forehead. "I lied because I knew how it would look. It looks worse now. I removed the planning notice. Verena saw me, we argued. Then I left." "Did she have her leather folder?" Roland frowned. "Yes." Agatha's satisfaction faltered. "You're sure?" "She waved it at me. Said she had kept the original notice and would show the parish council exactly what I'd done." Charles leaned forward. "And you left her there, holding the very evidence that might embarrass you?" Roland looked miserable. Yes. That was not how Agatha wanted the answer to go. They returned to Carsley. The rain had cleared, leaving the lanes bright and washed. At the old shelter, Bill had allowed the notice board to remain covered, but Agatha could still inspect the edges. She crouched beside the empty rectangle. Charles looked down at her. "Any revelation?" "I'm thinking. A dangerous hobby." She ignored him. Roland had admitted removing notices. He had motive. He had lied about his alibi. He had argued with Verena shortly before her death. It was almost perfect. Almost. Agatha studied the pinholes around the empty space. Several were large and blunt. Roland had told them he used the broad plastic drawing pins kept in his office. Because ordinary pins hurt his fingers. She had seen them there herself. Red, green and yellow with fat plastic heads. The holes on the left side of the empty rectangle were broad, but the torn notice found after Verena's death had been attached with a narrow blue glass-headed pin. Someone had made the board look as though Roland's planning notice had been torn away, but they had used the wrong sort of pin. Charles crouched beside her. "You look disappointed." "I am. Because Roland may merely be dishonest rather than homicidal. It would have been convenient." She stood. The empty space was staged. "Explain." Roland removed the genuine planning notice earlier. Whoever came later used another piece of paper in the same area, tore it down and left a blue pin behind. To make everyone think the murder concerned planning. Yes. Charles glanced towards the parish hall. So someone knew Roland had already been interfering with the board. Agatha looked in the same direction. Someone who knew the notices. Someone who knew what had been removed. Someone who had access to supplies. And perhaps most importantly, someone nobody noticed because she was always there helping. At the parish hall, June Tibbet was pinning up a revised booking schedule. She placed a blue glass-headed pin against the cork. Then, instead of pressing with her finger, she took a teaspoon from beside the tea-urn. She laid the bowl against the pinhead and pushed sideways. The brass shank bent. Agatha and Charles stood silently in the doorway. June looked around. "Oh, hello!" She smiled. "I may have misunderstood. I thought the hall was free." Agatha looked at the crooked blue pin. "No," she said quietly. "I think you understand things extremely well. Chapter 9. June's filing system." June Tibbet looked from Agatha to Charles, then to the teaspoon in her hand. "I'm afraid I don't understand." Agatha believed her less every time she said that. "We'd like to see the storage cupboard." June blinked. "The storage cupboard, the one with the booking forms." "Oh, of course." She put down the teaspoon, though I can't imagine why. "That," said Charles, "is what makes Agatha so enthusiastic." The cupboard lay behind the parish hall kitchen and contained 30 years of Carsley, refusing to throw anything away. There were Christmas decorations, folding signs, raffle books, cracked vases, old hymn sheets and a biscuit tin marked drawing pins. "Please return." Agatha opened it. Blue glass heads glittered among the brass. She took out 3. Every shank curved slightly sideways. Charles raised an eyebrow. "That seems rather persuasive." "It proves June bends pins," Agatha said. "Not that she kills people." June gave a nervous little laugh. "Exactly." Agatha turned. June's smile vanished. Mrs. Bloxby entered carrying a shopping bag. Agatha had telephoned her on the way over, partly because Mrs. Bloxby understood village administration better than anybody, and partly because Agatha had learned, painfully, the danger of accusing people without enough evidence. "What have you found?" Mrs. Bloxby asked. Agatha showed her the pins. Mrs. Bloxby nodded slowly. "June has always used a spoon." "My fingers ache," June said. "Quite," said Mrs. Bloxby. She looked around the cupboard, then at shelves of booking files. "You've kept everything very carefully." June relaxed a fraction. "I tried to." Agatha began pulling folders free. "Church committee, flower arranging, children's parties, parish rooms." Each contained forms, cancellations, and little notes about who had requested what. Some applications had pencil marks. "Not suitable. Check with PB." One bore Tamsin Rowe's name. Agatha opened it. Tamsin had once requested the small meeting room for a second-hand uniform exchange. The booking had been marked. "No may give wrong impression." Agatha looked up. "You refused this?" June's face tightened. There was already another event. Mrs. Bloxby checked the date. "No, there wasn't." June said nothing. Agatha found more. A support group discouraged because it might seem too personal. A debt advice session delayed until it never happened. A request from Nancy for an evening market moved repeatedly to less useful dates. Small decisions. Tiny acts of administration. Nothing dramatic enough to provoke a row. Enough, over years, to decide which parts of Carsley became visible. Mrs. Bloxby's voice was very gentle. "You weren't merely organising the hall, were you?" June folded her hands. Someone had to keep standards. There it was. Not apology. Pride. Agatha felt the case shift. Verena had arrived believing she was Carsley's new gatekeeper. She had not realised the job was already occupied. "What did Verena find?" Agatha asked. June looked at the floor. "I don't know." "Yes, you do." Agatha searched another shelf. No leather folder. Of course not. If June had taken Verena's before folder, she would hardly leave it beside the tea towels. But Mrs. Bloxby was studying a cardboard archive box. "June, what are these?" "Old notices." Inside lay dozens of cards removed over the years. Not Verena's collection. June's. Requests for lifts to hospital. Advertisements for cheap furniture. Appeals for children's clothes. Complaints. Lonely notices asking for walking companions or someone to share Christmas lunch. Some had never reached a public board at all. Agatha felt unexpectedly angry. "You kept them." "I kept records." "You stopped them being displayed." "Some things are better handled privately." "Better for whom?" June's mouth tightened. For the village. Charles, unusually serious, leaned against the door. The village seems to have survived other people, knowing it contains poor people. June flushed. "You make it sound cruel," Mrs. Blocksby answered. "I think perhaps that is what Verena did." Silence. Agatha understood. Verena's great mistake had not been taking power from June. It had been noticing what June had done with it. The folder, Agatha said. Verena had proof. June's eyes flickered. Only once. Enough. She found Tamsin's notice. She found Rowland's, Alan's complaints. Probably your booking records as well. She was going to show everyone that Carsley's tidy public face had been manufactured. "I only helped." "No," said Agatha. "You decided?" June's voice sharpened. "And what did she do?" "Exactly the same thing, only louder." That was closer to truth than Agatha expected. Verena and June had been rivals in the same trade. One called it communications. The other called it helping. Both decided what other people were permitted to reveal. Agatha glanced again at the blue pins. "You took pins to the board before the unveiling. For supplies. You knew Rowland had removed the planning notice." June did not answer. "You knew Verena would recognize something from her folder if it appeared on the board." Still silence. Agatha was not ready to accuse her yet. Not again. She needed the final movement. The lure. The missing folder. The staged empty space. She closed the archive box. "Tomorrow's reopening is still happening." June looked startled. "Patrick insists." "Good." Mrs. Blocksby studied Agatha. "You have a plan." Agatha picked up one bent blue pin. "I'm going to put something on the notice board." Charles sighed. "Please tell me it isn't another advertisement." Agatha smiled for the first time that afternoon. "No." Then she looked at June. "This one is for exactly the right eyes." Chapter 10. The board is open. The reopening of the Carsley notice board attracted more people than its original unveiling. Murder had improved attendance considerably. Patrick Bell stood beneath the shelter, determined to behave, as though the event remained a triumph of local government. For transparency. "Oh, do stop saying that," said Nancy. Patrick looked wounded. Agatha stood beside the board with Bill Wong, Mrs. Blocksby and Sir Charles. Alan Mudge remained near the back of the crowd, separate from everyone else. Before anything else, Agatha faced him. "Alan." He looked suspicious. "I owe you an apology." Carsley became completely silent. Public apologies by Agatha Raisin were rare enough to deserve preservation. "I accused you because the evidence seemed to fit," she continued. "But mostly because Verena had made me look foolish, and I was too pleased to find someone else who hated her." Alan stared at her. "That is remarkably honest. Don't make me regret it." A few people laughed. Agatha turned towards the others. "And those of you who stopped using his printing business because of what I said might consider whether you were investigating a murder or simply enjoying one." Several villagers suddenly found the notice board fascinating. Alan gave her the smallest nod. It would have to do. Agatha pointed to a fresh card she had pinned in the centre of the board. "Verena Quill, before contents. To be returned after today meeting." June Tibbet went pale. Agatha saw it. So did Bill. Roland Peake stepped forward. "You found it?" "No," said Agatha. A murmur ran through the crowd. Charles smiled. "Agatha has discovered advertising." June's hands tightened around her handbag. Agatha continued. "The folder disappeared after Verena died. Whoever took it believed it contained something dangerous." She looked towards Tamsin. "Your school shoes notice." Tamsin flushed but held her ground. "Alan's anonymous complaints. Rowland's planning objection. Eileen's notices. And records showing how Carsley decided which needs were respectable enough to display." June spoke softly. "This is all rather unpleasant." "Yes," said Agatha, "it was." She held up a blue glass-headed drawing pin. "The first time I noticed one of these, Verena used it to pin my advertisement under miscellaneous hobbies." The shank was bent. A few people smiled. Agatha glared at them. "That part is no longer funny." The smiles vanished. She held up a second pin in a small evidence envelope Bill had allowed her to show. This one was found with the torn notice beside Verena after she died. Then she raised a third, and this came from June's parish hall tin. June gave a small shake of her head. Lots of people use those pins. Exactly. The colour isn't important. Agatha turned the pin sideways. The bend is. Mrs. Blocksby spoke gently. June has painful fingers. For years she has pushed drawing pins into cork with the side of a teaspoon. Agatha nodded, which bends the shanks in the same direction. June's apologetic expression returned. That hardly proves murder. No. But it proves the torn notice at the scene came from the supply you habitually handled. Patrick looked bewildered. Why would June want Verena dead? Because Verena was replacing her. June's head came up. Agatha pressed on. For years June decided who got parish rooms, whose requests were delayed, which notices were displayed and which quietly vanished. Verena arrived and called it a communication system. June had been doing the same job unofficially for years. I helped people. Sometimes. Agatha's voice softened. And sometimes you protected Carsley from seeing people who needed help. Tamsin looked at June. My uniform exchange. June said nothing. You rejected it, said Tamsin. I thought it might embarrass you. You embarrassed me by deciding I should be ashamed. That hurt June more than Agatha's accusation. Agatha pointed to the empty rectangle on the board. Roland really did remove a planning objection. That gave June the perfect story. On the evening Verena died, June put another notice in the same place and made sure Verena came to see it. Bill spoke now. We know June was away from the parish hall during the relevant interval. Her booking slips had already been filed, despite her saying she was sorting them. June looked at him. Agatha continued. You used one of the private notices Verena had kept, something she would immediately recognize as coming from her folder. You told her it had appeared on the board again. June's breathing had become shallow. She came in the rain, you argued. No. You wanted the folder. No. Because once Verena showed Carsley what you had been suppressing for years, you would no longer be the helpful June Tibbet. June's voice sharpened. She didn't care about those people. The crowd froze. June seemed to hear herself too late. She kept their humiliations like specimens, she said. She enjoyed knowing. And you didn't. I protected them. You protected your version of the village. June's face crumpled with anger rather than grief. She was going to put everything on display. Names, requests, complaints. She said people ought to see what Carsley was really like. Agatha waited. June looked towards the wet lane. I only wanted the folder. Bill said nothing. That silence did the work. June finally whispered. She wouldn't give it to me. The rest came slowly. They had struggled over the folder near the shelter. Verena had lost her footing on the rain-slick edge of the lane and fallen badly. June, panicking, had not called for help. Instead, she had taken the folder, torn down the notice she had used as bait, and arranged the board to point suspicion towards Roland and the planning dispute. Then she had returned to the others, carrying biscuits and spare pins. Always helpful. Bill stepped beside her. June Tibbet, I need you to come with me. June looked at Mrs. Blocksby. I only wanted things kept decent. Mrs. Blocksby's expression was sad. Decency should not require people to disappear. Bill led June away. For a while nobody moved. Then Sansi approached the board. What happens to this monstrosity now? Patrick drew himself up. I believe we should establish a revised procedure. A groan rose from the crowd. Tamsin stepped forward with a handwritten card. Shows and uniform ex-chang, all sizes welcome. No questions asked. She pinned it in the centre. Nobody objected. Alan adjusted it slightly. Crooked, he said. Agatha looked at him. Don't start. Carsley kept its notice board, but the rules became wonderfully less elegant. Anyone could put up a notice if it was decent, readable, and not selling a miracle cure for damp. The result was cluttered, argumentative, and much kinder. And the bent blue pin? Such a tiny thing. A little brass shank pushed sideways until it held its shape. Rather like the truth, perhaps, when someone has been pressing on it for too long. Order can be useful. But when one person decides which troubles deserve to be visible, tidiness begins to look rather different. Back at her cottage, Agatha pinned her private inquiry notice perfectly straight above the kitchen table. 5 minutes later, Hodge knocked one corner loose. Agatha regarded this as criticism from an entirely unqualified source. Would you have noticed the bent blue pin? Or would you have been watching the notice? Everyone wanted you to see. Thank you for joining me, Clara Whitfield, for Cotswold Cozy Mysteries. I'd love to know which clue first made you suspicious of June, and whether Carsley's new notice board would survive a week in your village. Until our next Cotswold misadventure, remember, the smallest things pinned quietly in place are sometimes the things worth noticing most.